The stifling African air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, a deceptive calm before the storm. Deep within the ancient, sprawling reserve, a wounded tigress, a magnificent creature named Kali, pressed herself low against the tangled undergrowth. Her usually piercing amber eyes were clouded with pain and a primal, desperate fear. A jagged, bloodied gash marred her powerful flank, a testament to a recent brutal encounter. Her low, guttural snarl vibrated with a raw intensity, a warning that ripped through the quiet savanna. Directly before her, barely 10 yards away, stood Ranger David Miller, rifle held loosely at his side, his gaze unwavering, yet filled with a profound and unsettling mix of concern and alarm. The tension was a palpable, suffocating force, a silent standoff between two formidable forces of nature, one driven by instinct, the other by duty and a complex past. David Miller was not just any ranger. An American by birthright and training, he'd spent years honing his skills in the vast, untamed wildernesses of U.S. national parks, a quiet sentinel protecting America's natural heritage. But fate, in its cruel wisdom, had dealt him a devastating blow, a personal tragedy that had shattered his world and propelled him across oceans. He sought not just a change of scenery, but a new purpose, a way to mend the fractured pieces of his soul amidst the untamed beauty and unforgiving realities of an African wildlife reserve. Here, he was known for his quiet compassion, his almost uncanny ability to connect with the animals, yet he also held an unshakable adherence to the rigorous protocols designed to protect both wildlife and human life. His movements were always deliberate, his decisions weighed with a calm, almost stoic wisdom, a product of years spent navigating unpredictable wilderness situations. The move to Africa had been less a career change, more an act of self-preservation, a desperate search for meaning in the face of insurmountable loss. His current mission was a grim one, tracking a notorious band of poachers, ghosts in the bush that left a trail of destruction and death. He'd been following their faint signs for hours, the air growing heavier with a premonition of danger, a subtle shift in the natural rhythm of the wild. It was this hunt that had led him to this perilous encounter. He hadn't been looking for a tigress. He'd been looking for men. But the bush, as it always did, had presented an unexpected, heart-stopping twist. He stumbled upon Kaylee suddenly, almost walked directly into her. Her snarl was immediate, a deep, reverberating sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. She was magnificent, even in her agony, a fierce, protective spirit, her maternal instincts clearly heightened by the searing pain of her wound. David's eyes immediately registered the injury, the fresh crimson stain on her fur, the way she favored her left hind leg. He saw the danger, stark and clear, the imminent threat she posed, but he also saw something else, vulnerability. A mother protecting her own, wounded and cornered, a magnificent creature pushed to the brink. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming silence. He knew this wasn't just an animal. This was a force, a life hanging precariously in the balance. The air crackled, thick with the unspoken question of what his next move would be in this sudden, profound encounter. As the raw tension held them both captive, a silent plea echoed from David's very core. This story, this struggle, is just beginning. The wild is full of such untold sagas, tales of survival, courage, and the fragile balance between man and beast. To witness more of these thrilling narratives, to dive deeper into the heart of untamed nature, ensure you hit that subscribe button. Join us as we navigate the extraordinary challenges and breathtaking beauty of the natural world. The low, guttural snarl that ripped from Kaylee's throat was a primal warning, a sound that vibrated through David's very bones. Yet it was not the only sound that registered in the dense jungle air. Amidst the rustling leaves and the distant calls of exotic birds, a faint whimper, then another, barely audible, reached his ears. It was a sound he knew instinctively, the cry of young, vulnerable life. His gaze, previously locked on Kaylee's menacing eyes, dropped to the thick undergrowth behind her, and a cold dread settled in his stomach. Cubs. She wasn't alone. This wasn't merely a territorial dispute or an injured beast lashing out. This was a mother, severely wounded, protecting her offspring. The situation instantly escalated from dangerous to critically complex. His mission had been clear: track the poachers, neutralize the threat they posed to the reserve's precious wildlife. But now, a new, unforeseen variable had entered the equation. He couldn't simply neutralize Kali without endangering her hidden young. His training, honed in the structured environment of American national parks, focused on protocols for animal encounters, tranquilization, and safe capture. But none of it truly prepared him for the raw, desperate ferocity of a mother tigress defending her cubs, especially one clearly suffering. As Kali shifted, gritting her teeth, he caught a clearer glimpse of her right flank, a deep, ugly gash, inflamed and oozing, stretched across her muscular body. It wasn't a bullet wound, nor the mark of a predator. The jagged edges, the way the flesh was torn and pulled, screamed of a snare, a poacher's snare. The very poachers he was tracking had laid this cruel trap, turning this magnificent creature into a desperate, cornered animal. The unseen threat of the poachers now had a tangible, agonizing consequence directly in front of him. They were the true antagonists, their greed and callous disregard for life manifesting in Kaylee's pain and the imminent danger to her young. His immediate obstacle, however, remained Kaylee's unpredictable aggression, a shield born of agony and an instinct to protect. David slowly lowered his rifle, the movement deliberate, almost imperceptible. He needed to assess, to understand. He tried to project calm, speaking softly, his voice a low rumble intended to soothe, not threaten. "Easy, girl. Easy, Kaylee," he murmured, using the name he'd seen in the reserve's tracking logs. He took a single, slow step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving hers, gauging her reaction. Her ears flattened, a low growl rumbling in her chest. But she didn't leap. A tiny victory. He considered tranquilizing her, rapidly weighing the risks. The dart would take precious moments to prepare, to aim, to deliver its sedative payload. In that delay, the poachers could arrive, drawn by the commotion or by their own illicit trail. Or worse, the dart itself, a sudden, sharp sting, might trigger a final furious charge, putting her cubs in even greater peril if she fell in the wrong place, or if he misjudged her trajectory. His American training had taught him precision, but this wild, untamed African landscape and its inhabitants demanded a different kind of wisdom, one that transcended textbook scenarios. This was raw, untamed instinct against calculated intervention, and for the first time in a long while, David felt woefully unprepared. He needed a different approach, one that balanced intervention with empathy, an approach not quite covered in any manual. The air crackled with a primeval energy as Kaylee, a magnificent, raw force of nature, mistook David's hesitant movements for an overt act of aggression. Her low growl erupted into a full-throated roar, a sound that vibrated through David's very bones, stripping away his veneer of calm. In a sudden, explosive lunge, she propelled her massive, injured body forward, a blur of striped fury. David, his instincts honed by years in the field, reacted purely on reflex. He twisted away, a fraction of a second separating him from a devastating blow. The tip of her claw, razor-sharp and powerful even in its glancing contact, raked across his forearm, tearing through his sleeve and leaving a burning trail of pain. It wasn't a deep wound, more a searing reminder of the raw power he faced, a testament to the fact that even his best intentions were irrelevant in the face of a mother's primal defense. The sharp sting on his arm, a physical manifestation of the danger, only underscored the perilous situation. He stumbled back, adrenaline coursing through him, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cubs, startled by their mother's violent outburst and David's sudden movement, cried out in unison, their small, desolate whimpers echoing the fear that gripped them. Their distress, however, only served to ignite a fiercer fire in Kaylee's eyes, cementing her conviction that David was a threat to her precious offspring. She stood her ground, a quivering monument to maternal ferocity, every muscle taut, every breath a shallow gasp of pain and defiance. Kaylee's world had narrowed to this immediate threat, this constant, throbbing agony. Narrating her ordeal, she had been snared days ago. The metallic bite of the trap had been sudden, brutal, and utterly debilitating. Every movement since then had been a torment, each step a searing reminder of the cruel metal embedded in her flesh. She remembered the desperate, days-long struggle to free herself, the raw terror as the wound festered, sapping her strength. The hunt had become an impossible task, her usual silent grace replaced by a limping, agonizing shuffle. Hunger gnawed at her, but the pain was a more insistent, ever-present companion. Yet, through it all, one instinct remained paramount: her cubs. She had dragged herself, weak and delirious, back to their den, their small bodies a beacon in her darkening world. She had licked their fur, nudged them close, a silent promise to protect them with her last breath. Every snarl, every desperate lunge, every ounce of her dwindling strength was for them. Her rage wasn't mindless aggression. It was the raw, unyielding love of a mother pushed to the brink by suffering and an unyielding will to protect her young. David, clutching his forearm, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The scratch was superficial, but the emotional impact was profound. He grappled with the ethical dilemma that now gripped him with an almost physical intensity. His duty as a ranger was unequivocal: protect wildlife, preserve the delicate balance of the ecosystem. But his other, equally binding duty was to ensure human safety, both his own and that of any potential rescue team. He was caught between his training and his burgeoning empathy. He thought of his own past loss, a raw, still healing wound in his soul. He remembered the overwhelming, all-consuming instinct to protect, to shield, to fight for those he loved. Kaylee's desperate ferocity, her snarling defiance, resonated deeply within him, stirring a powerful, unwelcome echo of his own grief. He understood her, perhaps too well. She was a mother, wounded and desperate, facing what she perceived as an existential threat to her most vulnerable. How could he, David Miller, reconcile his need for action with the profound respect he felt for her plight? The answer eluded him, lost somewhere in the oppressive heat and the primal snarls of a tigress fighting for her life's most precious treasures. David carefully studied Kaylee, his earlier fear now tempered by an almost clinical observation. He saw not just a snarling beast, but a creature consumed by a singular, overwhelming terror. Her eyes, usually pools of predatory confidence, were wide with a frantic desperation, darting between him and the hidden thicket where her cubs lay. He noticed the way her flank heaved with ragged breaths, not just from exertion, but from a deeper, more profound anguish. The wound on her leg, initially viewed as merely dangerous, now struck him as a testament to unimaginable suffering. It was a wire snare, he now clearly saw, one of the crudest and most vicious designs, meant to crush bone and sever flesh. This wasn't the work of opportunistic hunters. This was the signature of a particularly cruel and experienced poaching outfit, one that reveled in inflicting prolonged torment. The realization hardened David's resolve. He couldn't leave her to such a fate, nor could he allow these perpetrators to succeed. He understood, with a chilling certainty, that the poachers would not hesitate to kill Kaylee and take her cubs, either for illegal trade or to eliminate any potential future threat. Then, a faint, rhythmic thumping reached his ears, distant but unmistakable. It was the sound of heavy boots on dry earth approaching. The poachers. A shiver ran down David's spine, but it wasn't fear for himself, not entirely. It was the sudden oppressive weight of urgency. His window of opportunity was rapidly closing. He had mere minutes, perhaps even seconds, to act before they arrived, before the situation spiraled into an even greater catastrophe. Any aggressive move against Kaylee now, any sudden motion, could trigger her protective instincts into a lethal attack, not just on him, but potentially on her own cubs in a chaotic melee. And if he did nothing, if he simply retreated, he would be leaving her and her vulnerable offspring to the mercy of men who knew none. The dilemma, already crushing, intensified tenfold with the approaching threat. He had to think, to move, to react, all while maintaining a fragile peace with the wounded tigress before him. His gaze swept the immediate area, desperately searching for anything, any advantage. His eyes landed on a small, glinting object, partially obscured by a fallen branch, not 5 feet from Kaylee's menacing paws. A tranquilizer dart. It lay there, almost impossibly, as if placed by some divine hand. He recognized the distinct yellow fletchings of the dart used by the reserve's veterinary team, a potent sedative, enough to subdue an animal of Kaylee's size. It must have been dropped, perhaps by the poachers themselves during an earlier unsuccessful attempt to capture her, or by a previous ranger who had been forced to retreat. A flicker of hope, bright and audacious, ignited within him. The dart. It was a lifeline, a desperate, dangerous chance. A plan, audacious and incredibly risky, began to formulate in David's mind. His American pragmatic problem-solving skills, honed by years in the U.S. National Park Service, kicked into overdrive. The logic was simple, if the execution was fraught with peril. He needed that dart. He needed to reach it, load it into his own dart gun, and then administer it to Kaylee, all before the poachers arrived, all without provoking her into a fatal attack. The thought alone made his palms sweat, but the alternative was unthinkable. This was no longer just about protecting wildlife. It was about saving a mother and her cubs from a brutal end, and in doing so, perhaps finding a measure of his own redemption. Every fiber of his being screamed at the danger, but a deeper, more primal instinct, one born of empathy and duty, compelled him forward. He had to try. He had to move. The thumping grew louder, closer. Time was running out. David, his heart still thrumming from the near miss, took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing his body to calm, his mind to focus. He knew the risks were astronomical, but leaving the dart where it lay, a potential salvation for Kaylee and her cubs, was not an option. The dense African brush, usually a hindrance, now offered a precarious advantage. He began to move, a phantom in the undergrowth, each footfall measured, each rustle of leaves sending a jolt of anxiety through him. His eyes remained locked on Kaylee, a blazing, furious beacon of maternal instinct. He pictured the dart, barely visible against the dark earth, just a few yards from her snarling snout. He used every trick he'd learned in his years of tracking and observation. He moved when Kaylee's gaze drifted, however slightly, to her cubs. He ducked low, making himself as small a target as possible, imagining his silhouette against the harsh sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the potent primal musk of the tigress. Every snap of a twig beneath his boots felt amplified, a thunderclap in the oppressive silence. He could feel Kylie's eyes on him, a palpable weight even when he couldn't meet them directly. She was a coiled spring, ready to unleash unimaginable force. He heard the faint, desperate whimpers of the cubs again, a raw, innocent sound that spurred him forward, yet also cemented Kaylee's distrust. He was inching closer, the dart now a defined shape, tantalizingly within reach. He could see the small plastic fin, the glint of the needle. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the immense concentration required to execute this perilous maneuver. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, and it would be over. For him, and perhaps for Kaylee and her cubs. He thought of his American training, the sterile environments, the controlled simulations. None of it truly prepared him for the raw, untamed reality of this moment. This ancient dance between predator and would-be helper. This was a dance on the razor's edge of survival. Then, for a breathtaking fraction of a second, something shifted. As he cautiously raised his gaze, he met Kylie's eyes directly. Her pupils, usually slits of contained fury, seemed to widen marginally. There was a flicker, not of submission but perhaps of raw, unadulterated exhaustion. Her breathing was ragged, her flank still heaving from her earlier exertion. Was it a fleeting moment of recognition? Or just the sheer, debilitating weight of her pain and the unrelenting burden of protecting her young? For an instant, the snarling defiance seemed to soften, replaced by a deep, almost ancient understanding. It was gone as quickly as it came, a ghost of an expression in the depths of her golden eyes. But it was enough to momentarily disarm David, to suggest a sliver of hope, a potential bridge across the chasm of instinct and fear. He felt a fleeting connection, a silent plea in her gaze that spoke volumes of her suffering and her desperate need. He was almost there. His outstretched fingers grazed the rough, dry leaves around the dart. Just a few more inches, a quiet, smooth motion, and it would be his. The silence of the bush was absolute, broken only by the distant chirping of unseen insects and the rhythmic pounding of his own heart. The dart was within his grasp, his fingertips brushing against the cool plastic. But the fragile piece, the fleeting flicker of understanding, was shattered. A new sound, distinct and menacing, ripped through the stillness. Not the rustle of animals, nor the cry of birds, but the unmistakable crunch of heavy boots on dry leaves, accompanied by the low murmur of human voices. The poachers. They were closer than he had anticipated, their proximity a chilling pronouncement of impending doom. The sound was too close for comfort, too close for any further hesitation. He had mere seconds, perhaps less, to react. The dart was still just out of reach, but the poachers were undeniably, terrifyingly here. David now held the tranquilizer dart firmly in his grip, its cool, smooth surface a stark contrast to the rapidly escalating heat of the situation. 3 seconds. That was all the time he had to make an impossible choice, a decision that would dictate the fate of this magnificent tigress, her vulnerable cubs, and perhaps even his own life. The dart represented a path of calculated risk, a chance to subdue Kaylee, treat her agonizing wound, and shield her offspring from the imminent danger of the poachers. It was the choice of a rescuer, a healer, but it carried the inherent peril of approaching a wild, enraged animal, even one sedated. The alternative, a horrifying twist of his ranger's oath, involved using his firearm on the approaching poachers. That would definitely address the immediate human threat, but it would leave Kylie, still wounded and vulnerable, to fend for herself, her cubs potentially orphaned or even caught in the crossfire. His American training, honed in the structured environments of national parks, emphasized de-escalation, but it also ingrained the principle of self-defense and the protection of wildlife at all costs. This was not a textbook scenario. It was raw, unpredictable wilderness, demanding a choice guided by instinct as much as training. As if on cue, the rustling in the dense undergrowth intensified, then stopped abruptly. Two figures emerged from the dappled shadows, their silhouettes hardened by the anticipation of their vile trade. They were armed, their rifles held with a casual readiness that spoke of experience and a chilling lack of conscience. Their eyes, scanning the clearing, immediately locked onto Kaylee, snarling and defiant, her attention divided between David and the newcomers. There was a cruel glint in their gaze, a predatory hunger for the valuable animal. They saw not a suffering mother, but a prize, a commodity. They were expecting an easy capture, a wounded beast too weak to offer significant resistance. Their presence solidified David's resolve, clarifying the moral imperative that had been warring within him. No matter what, these poachers would not lay a hand on Kaylee or her cubs. Driven by an instinct that superseded all formal training, a deep sense of justice burning in his chest, David made his choice. It wasn't the dart for Kaylee. It wasn't a direct shot at the poachers. He had to buy time, create a diversion, shift the focus away from the tigress and her concealed young. With a sudden, explosive surge of energy, he let out a guttural shout, a primal roar that echoed through the otherwise silent forest. Simultaneously, he slammed the butt of his rifle against a nearby tree trunk, creating a sharp, resounding crack that reverberated through the air. The sound was designed to be disorienting, unexpected, a sudden rupture in the tense stillness. The poachers, their eyes fixed on Kali just moments before, flinched, their heads snapping towards the source of the commotion. Their expressions shifted from triumphant anticipation to startled confusion, then rapidly to aggressive challenge as they registered David's presence. He had succeeded in his immediate goal. Their attention was now fully on him, away from the vulnerable tigress and her hidden progeny. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but a strange calm settled over David. He faced them head-on, his stance wide, his rifle now raised defensively, daring them to take another step. The jungle had gone from a place of natural tension to a battleground, and David was ready to hold his ground. His heart still hammered, but it was no longer just fear. It was the thrum of purpose, the pulse of a protector. The poachers, momentarily stunned by David's sudden appearance and defiant shout, quickly recovered their predatory composure. Their initial confusion gave way to a hardened vigilance as they assessed this unexpected obstacle. One, a burly man with a scar dissecting his left eyebrow, raised his rifle slightly, its black maw gazing steadily in David's direction. The other, younger and leaner, circled slightly, trying to get a better angle, his eyes darting between David and the still snarling Kaylee. David knew he had bought a few precious seconds, but this was merely the opening act. He tightened his grip on his rifle, not as an offensive weapon yet, but as a deterrent, a clear signal of his readiness to defend. "This is a protected reserve." David's voice, though strained, projected authority. "Drop your weapons and surrender. You are trespassing and attempting to poach endangered animals. The authorities have been alerted." He knew he was bluffing about the immediate authorities, but it was a gamble to sow doubt and buy more time. He needed to assess their numbers, their intentions, and find an opening to further secure Kali and her cubs. The burly poacher scoffed, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against the silence. "Authorities? You're far from any help out here, gringo. This cat is worth a fortune, and you're just a nuisance." His companion grinned, a cruel flash of white teeth in the dim light. David didn't flinch. He recognized the type, hardened, ruthless, driven by greed. His American training, while not designed for direct confrontation with armed poachers in the African bush, had instilled in him a critical ability to read situations, to gauge threats. He could see the aggression in their eyes, but also a flicker of surprise at his unexpected appearance. He needed to keep their focus entirely on him, to prevent them from remembering Kali and her vulnerability, or from finding the cubs. "This animal is under my protection," David stated, his voice firm, projecting an authority he wasn't entirely feeling. "You will not touch her. I will not allow it." Just as the burly poacher took a menacing step forward, raising his rifle higher, something extraordinary happened. Kylie, who had been a silent, suffering observer, suddenly erupted. It was a raw, primal surge of protective energy. Her earlier exhaustion seemed to vanish, replaced by an incandescent rage. With a guttural roar that dwarfed David's earlier shout, she launched herself not at David, but at the younger poacher who had been attempting to flank David. The speed and ferocity of her charge were breathtaking. The poacher, caught completely off guard, barely had time to react before Kaylee was on him. Her wounded leg seemed momentarily forgotten as she swiped with a powerful forepaw, claws extended, raking across his arm and sending his rifle clattering to the ground. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of terror and pain, as the tigress, her eyes burning with maternal fury, pinned him briefly to the ground. It was an astonishing display of instinct, a mother's ultimate sacrifice and defense, turning the tables in an instant. Kaylee was not merely protecting herself, she was actively covering her cubs, engaging the aggressor closest to their hiding place, aiding David in a way he could never have anticipated. The burly poacher, frozen for a split second by the sudden, savage turn of events, shouted at his downed comrade. This was David's chance. With the burly poacher momentarily distracted, his attention split between his injured accomplice and the furious tigress. David moved. He didn't hesitate. Leveraging his training, he lunged forward, tackling the remaining poacher with a ferocity born of adrenaline and purpose. The sound of their impact was a harsh thud, the burly poacher's rifle flying from his grasp as they tumbled to the ground. David used his weight and leverage, twisting the man's arm, securing him in a grapple, pinning him face down against the earth. The poacher struggled, grunting, but David's grip was unyielding. Meanwhile, Kaylee, after her initial devastating assault, disengaged from the screaming younger poacher. Her burst of adrenaline-fueled energy rapidly drained away, leaving her trembling. She stumbled back towards her original position, collapsing heavily near the sounds of her hidden cubs, her chest heaving, a low growl rumbling in her throat as a warning. The younger poacher, clutching his bleeding arm, scrambled to his feet. His face was pale with shock and pain, and without a second thought for his captured accomplice, he turned and fled wildly into the dense bush, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The skirmish had been brutal, swift, and utterly unexpected. The air was thick with the scent of fear and blood, and a tense silence descended once more, broken only by Kaylee's ragged breathing and David's own labored gasps as he held the subdued poacher firmly. The immediate threat was momentarily neutralized, but David knew his fight was far from over. David quickly moved, his focus shifting entirely to Kaylee once the immediate threat of the poachers was mitigated. The exhausted tigress lay panting heavily, her eyes half closed but still fixed protectively on the clump of bushes where her cubs were hidden. Her earlier burst of adrenaline had completely depleted her, and she was clearly fading fast. Recognizing the urgency, David didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her, his movements gentle and deliberate, pulling out a preloaded tranquilizer dart from his pouch. With practiced precision, he administered the sedative, watching as her powerful muscles began to relax, her heavy eyelids finally fluttering closed. It was a difficult decision, but necessary for her survival and the safety of her cubs. Once Kylie was safely sedated and no longer a perceived threat, David used his satellite phone to call for immediate backup from the reserve headquarters. He provided his precise coordinates and a concise report of the situation: a wounded tigress, 2 cubs, and a captured poacher, with another having fled. He emphasized the need for the veterinary team to arrive as quickly as possible. While awaiting their arrival, David kept a vigilant watch, securing the subdued poacher with restraints he carried for such emergencies, ensuring the man remained incapacitated and posed no further danger. He periodically checked on Kaylee, gently stroking her fur, a silent promise of care. He could hear the faint whimpers of the cubs from their hiding spot, a poignant reminder of the fragile lives depending on him. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, the familiar hum of the reserve's all-terrain vehicle broke the jungle's silence. The veterinary team, consisting of Dr. Lena Hansen, a seasoned wildlife vet, and her assistant, arrived swiftly. They immediately set to work, their movements efficient and coordinated. Dr. Hansen meticulously examined Kaylee's snare wound, cleaning it thoroughly and administering antibiotics and pain relief. David explained the precise circumstances, and the vet nodded gravely, commending his quick thinking and courage. The cubs, seeing their mother now still and seemingly peaceful, cautiously emerged from their hiding place. Their tiny, wide eyes surveyed the scene before cautiously nudging against their mother's inert form, their soft whines heartbreakingly tender. Over the next few days, Kaylee's recovery was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to her resilience and the dedicated care she received. Under the watchful eyes of the veterinary team and David, she slowly regained her strength. Her wound healed cleanly, and her maternal instincts, once clouded by pain and fear, returned with full force. David spent hours observing her, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He watched her nurse her cubs, teach them to stalk imaginary prey, and guard them fiercely against perceived threats. The bond between them was palpable, a powerful illustration of life's enduring strength. For David, this incident was a pivotal moment. The raw, unfiltered confrontation with the poachers, the desperate struggle to protect Kaylee and her cubs, had deepened his connection to this wild land and its inhabitants. The ghosts of his past, the unbearable weight of loss that had driven him to Africa, seemed to finally recede. He hadn't just saved a tigress. He had found a new iteration of himself, a man whose purpose was now inextricably linked to the wild heart of Africa. His compassionate spirit, coupled with his pragmatic American resourcefulness, had made all the difference. He continued his work in the reserve, a more seasoned and resolute ranger, forever changed by the amber eyes of a wounded tigress and the tiny, hopeful squeaks of her cubs. The captured poacher was handed over to the authorities, facing the full extent of the law, a small victory in the ongoing battle for conservation. This story, like so many others hidden within the vast expanses of our planet, speaks volumes about resilience, courage, and the unwavering power of a mother's love. It reminds us that every creature, no matter how fierce, deserves our protection, and that the interconnectedness of life demands our respect and stewardship. The challenges facing African wildlife are immense, but with dedicated individuals like David and the collective will of humanity, there is hope for a future where these majestic creatures can thrive. If this gripping tale of survival and redemption resonated with you, if you were moved by the courage of Kaylee and the unwavering spirit of Ranger David, then please become part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories of wildlife, daring rescues, and the incredible resilience of nature. Join us as we explore the wonders of our planet and champion the cause of conservation. Your support helps us continue to share these vital stories. Watch our next video to delve deeper into the daily struggles and triumphs of animal rangers in the heart of Africa.